Well, here we are live, Joe Chaffee and Joe Rayo on the Joe and Joe Weather Show on this Wednesday night, July the 8th. And welcome to those of you who are listening, by the way, on the podcast, which is now available on Google Podcasts. So, Joe, we're on 6 different platforms now. We're on Anchor, on Breaker, on Google Podcasts, on Pocket Casts, Radio Public, or Spotify. So we're just going
And
to have
also my two Facebook pages, and we do get people who watch from there. So we're
as
all
as
we're all
well
over the
they
place.
should. So let me just get everybody else on board from Twitter and Facebook. It's all going to be about the tropical low tonight, folks. That's going to try and form off the North Carolina coast. We'll do a little bit of the current weather, but because of the fact that I'm still having internet issues. I'm trying to kind of save my data so that I can do a live stream tomorrow and again on Friday. Because once the data's gone, then I'm gone. So it'll, that's we'll just have to go to recorded videos until we can get that resolved. So it's all about the tropical low. And you could certainly feel it today, Joe. I mean, in terms of everything that's setting up along the East Coast, whenever we get a tropical-like system, it's as if the atmosphere has to kind of prep itself before its arrival, and you can feel it today. The humidity was very high, very steamy out, and I think we're going to probably see more of that tomorrow ahead of this whatever's coming up the East Coast.
Well, we had 1.01 inches here at the home base. We also had a couple of lightning strikes, which briefly, for a matter of seconds, but briefly shut down power here. The light flickered. I lost my computer twice, once at 1 o'clock and once at 4:30. So we had a very active, muggy, humid, showery day today. Tomorrow, Joe, looks like it's just going to be hot and humid. Maybe heat indices reaching well up into the 90s in many spots. And then we'll turn our attention, as you said, on Friday into the start of the weekend to what looks to be potentially Faye, the F storm on our list. I think the earliest that we've ever seen a storm with the letter F this
Well,
early.
it may very well turn out to be that. The only thing I would say is tropical or not. I think the outcome is it's going to be the same regardless. It's really just the technical designation that if it winds up being designated a tropical depression or a tropical storm, it doesn't really change what we're going to see out of this, which is a low that moves up the coast. And it's a nice looking tight little low when you look at it on the maps tonight and on the models. We're going to have an arm of rain, I think, that comes up. Maybe a little bit of wind along the coast, but unless this thing really develops into something a little stronger than what's being indicated. But I don't think if you experience this and you didn't know it was a named tropical storm, I don't know that it would stand out for any reason.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. Once it gets a name, immediately it moves to the top of the list in terms of the coverage, so to speak, on your local newscasts. Whereas, again, as you just mentioned, without a name, it would just be nothing worse maybe than a lot of us saw today with lightning and thunder and/or showers and some heavy doses of rain. But once it gets christened, once it gets a name, then all of a sudden everybody starts running around saying, "Oh my goodness, the tropical storm is on its way to hit us."
Exactly.
And really, again, no big difference than your average, showery, gusty, heavy rainstorm. But again, it has a name, so it gets suddenly lifted in terms of priority in the news outlets.
I brought up the U.S. satellite loop. We've got this very broad area of cloudiness, and one thing that you can pick out right away from looking at this loop is we're not seeing anything really all that well organized here at the moment. Where there is a surface low that's been analyzed late this afternoon is in this area just right along the immediate North Carolina, South Carolina coast, probably somewhere around Wilmington. And there's very little going on in that area. In fact, I'll take the drawing off, and you can normally if this were a situation that, I mean, it is a situation that we're looking for some kind of low level circulation developing, where we're seeing convection around the low of forming low level center. You're not seeing it there right now, so I don't anticipate uh, seeing the hurricane center doing anything with this. Certainly at this at the 8 o'clock hour when they do their next update, I imagine they're just going to keep things the same with regards to probability at about at 70% of developing into a tropical cyclone. In the meantime, Joe, while that's going on, we do have this upper trough that's moving through New England. And of course, there's been some severe weather there. And we'll take a look at that on the radar. And the stuff that impacted you seemed to hit its peak over you to about just north of New York City. And then as it moved southward, the area just weakened and fell apart. But all of this, by the way, is going to be driven. We've got energy that's coming in across the northwest into southern Canada. There's a little upper low that's going to be in the southeast, and it's a trough that's going to drop down from the northern plains. It's going to pick this thing up and shoot it northward. So the big question is, are we going to have a surface low that's going to be offshore? Or just enough offshore that you're going to be able to tap some development from the warm ocean, or is the low going to be straddling the coast or be partially inland? I think that's going to be that's going to be the deciding factor in terms of whether this is going to wind up developing into anything quote unquote tropical or not.
Well, I think by the time we get to Friday morning, the system is going to be probably right either on or just east of the Virginia Capes. And then literally it will, as you mentioned, Joe, straddle the coastline up across the Delmarva region. Maybe by the time we get to Saturday morning, again, this is a slow moving system. So Saturday morning, we may find it somewhere near or just off of the central Jersey coast. And after that, probably will move uh, over Long Island and on up into southern New England. And again, whether or not it can get far enough offshore for it to acquire enough of a circulation, enough for the Hurricane Center to be convinced that it does deserve a name, that will be decided, I'm sure, in the coming next 48 to 72 hours. But right now, I agree with you. There's not much change when they issue the next update, which I guess will be at 8 o'clock,
All right.
other than to simply say, hey, it's down there, and hey, we still think there's a 70% chance of some kind of development.
If you look at the radar, I've got the radar loop of the southeast, and it is you could actually see these echoes turning in a counterclockwise fashion here. So there is some sort of broad low. I'm going to probably going to put it just south of along the coast or just south of Wilmington. But again, judging by how those echoes are turning, something is there. But if we're going to see this really become into a tropical system, you have to start looking for echoes to develop around where the low level center is. Until then, you don't really have a truly tropical system. You got to get some kind of a core of thunderstorms to develop near that low area of low pressure. That may come tomorrow. If you look at some of the models, there are certainly some strong hints that you're going to see convection developing near a low level center. It's not 100% clear, but it is there. So we'll be watching for that. Meanwhile, just looking at the radar as of 7:08 Eastern Time, Joe, you got some big thunderstorms rolling up through Maine. Big severe thunderstorm watches over parts of northern New England. That's where the severe weather really is tonight. There's a line that runs from northern Massachusetts to just through the Catskills into northeastern PA. There are a few strong cells embedded in that, but it looks like that line is weakening as it moves southeastward. And then there was the stuff from earlier, which now lies across Long Island through central Jersey and into southeastern Pennsylvania. That line has weakened considerably. There were a bunch of flash flood warnings up earlier in parts of southeastern New York. I don't know if you were in one of the flash flood warnings, but these storms are weakening as these lines move southward. So I'm thinking that we're not really going to see too much more other than what's already on the radar at the moment. And the stronger cells up in New England, those will fade out after dark.
Peter Bicker on the chat board asks a very good question. Why are they naming all of these weak systems this year? In other words, I guess some believe that what we've seen so far really didn't deserve to be christened with a name, and now I guess he's looking at the potential for Faye in the coming days ahead, but it really doesn't look all that much like the kind of system that deserves a tropical storm moniker.
Right.
But
Well, whatever the criteria that the Hurricane Center has when they check the boxes off, and if enough boxes checked off, they make it. They give it a tropical storm. There has been and I've seen conversations about this very subject. Is the threshold of naming tropical systems a lot lower than what it used to be? Would we had these would these systems been named back 20 or 30 years ago? I mean, you and I know that from experience that a number of storms did basically, you know, fall under the table and developed, but weren't really acknowledged until they went through post analysis. I don't know what the answer to that is, truthfully. I just I kind of make the assumption that whatever, I give them the benefit of the doubt. Although sometimes for some systems, like I remember the one, whatever it was, the B storm or the C storm last year, that was basically a severe thunderstorm out in the Caribbean, where
right,
the gales went out it went out 20 miles from the north of the center and 10 miles to the south. I mean,
right.
we've seen clusters of severe weather bigger than that. So I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I think certainly um, I don't know about Edward because it was in the middle of the Atlantic, and I really didn't take a good look at it. The other ones looked to me like they were naming them was okay. Cristobal, especially, I think that got named into a tropical storm, so I don't have too many problems with that. By the way, here's the surface, and I wanted to bring this up because this is another thing you want to look at when it comes to development. You're gonna, and I have here up the surface from North and South Carolina observations at 7 o'clock tonight. And if you take a look at we have buoy 41064 has a southeast wind at 11, gusting to 18, and that's east of Wilmington. There's another buoy well south of Wilmington, buoy 41013, where the wind is west at 7. And then the land winds, Wilmington itself is east northeast at 8, and Brunswick Airport is actually north northwest at 6. So when you look at that, this is probably where your weak low is right now as of the 7 o'clock obs. But when you see some of the observations that are going on around here, Joe, I mean, nobody's got a wind gust greater than 20 knots. So clearly, this low is very weak at this point.
Right, right. Well, if it happens to move a little further to the east and get more of it out over the open waters of the relatively warm for this for this time of the year, the Atlantic Ocean, we may very well see some intensification, and it may very well acquire a name. But I think that the earliest that that would happen would not be until it reaches the Virginia Capes area. That would be on Friday morning, or maybe during Friday and Friday night. I don't expect anything to happen of any great concern between now and, let's say, Friday morning, other than the fact that the system is going to be continuing to drift ever so slowly to the
Right.
north.
I did bring up the water temperature map, which you can find on the Hurricane Center's website. And indeed, you want water temperatures above 26 Celsius are supportive for the development of a tropical storm, and that 26 Celsius line reaches almost to about southern Delaware. So that translates to about 78, 79-degree water temperature. And then the water temperatures cool off, although they are warm up to southern New England relative to normal. But the 28 plus area of ocean water temperatures is where this thing is going to be sitting from now up until through Thursday night before it starts to move northward. So the water temperatures are certainly supportive. We're seeing a warming of water temperatures across the tropical Atlantic and the subtropical Atlantic, and of course the Gulf of Mexico is very warm. The Florida Straits, the Bahamas, the Southeast Gulf with water temperatures of 30 Celsius or higher, so 86 Celsius or higher. So indeed, the ocean water temperatures are supportive. And Joe, on the sea surface temperature anomaly over the last 7 days, oddly enough, the area from from even though that water is 28C, it's actually a little bit below average, slightly.
Really?
From coastal North Carolina south to northern Florida, the water temperatures are actually just a touch cooler than average. But when you go north of there and you head toward our area from Delaware on up through coastal New England, the water temperatures are actually running about 2 degrees Celsius or more above average. That's pretty significant. We mentioned how the water temperatures are already up in the low and mid 70s, which for early July is really warm.
Right. In fact, David Scott mentions on the chat board, he says, Joe R., Long Beach, New York, ocean temperature today, 73.1 degrees.
Yeah, that
That's
buoy at
amazing.
Fire Island is Reaver posted it for me. The buoy at Fire Island is at 76, and that's 20 miles offshore, but it's still pretty
Well,
warm.
these are temperatures that you don't normally expect to see until maybe late August or September, as we're actually approaching September 10th, the traditional peak of the hurricane season. So again, we're quite a ways ahead of schedule, at least locally, in terms of water temperatures this year.
All right, so here's the upper air. I've got the GFS. Let's run through this. Let's run through this and see what we're dealing with. And as we mentioned, if you take a look off the North Carolina coast, there's a little upper low there, that little closed circle. That would represent our quote unquote tropical system. If you look on the upper left, there's a trough that's coming into the northern plains with a short wave that's moving into the western lakes. And then that, as I mentioned yesterday, kind of acts as a bit of a lever and it lifts up the coastal low straight northward. You see it there in northwest New Jersey, and then it winds up going into upstate New York by Friday evening. The trough drops into the east, actually strengthens, which is a bit of a change from what we saw uh, a few days ago, where it was just weakening this, but it actually has a fairly strong trough present in the northeast Monday into Tuesday. So just to put a heads up, I'm wondering whether we might have some kind of thunderstorms to deal with when that upper trough swings through early next week. But that's later on down the road. The bottom line is that this trough is acting as the mechanism to lift the system along the coast straight northward, and all the models seem to agree with this. There's some slight difference in terms of positioning, but they all have the same idea. And here's the surface, Joe, the new GFS. I mean, it's very consistent. The NAM, they're really all pretty close. And when we run the surface map, which we will do so, just there it goes. So there's your low during the day Thursday. As you said, tomorrow doesn't appear to be any big problem here. We're just kind of dealing with normally ahead in a situation like this, the day before actually winds up being a reasonable day because of some subsidence that's going on upstream. Uh, the low is there off the North Carolina's coast. You see this hook of rain that circulates around it. Surface low is just east of Chesapeake Bay at 2 a.m. Friday. By 2 p.m. Friday, it's in Delaware Bay, touching Cape May, and then it's over New York City Friday evening. So that arm of heavy rain just moves straight northward up the coast Friday morning, reaching New York City, and by Friday evening, 7 or 8 o'clock, it's mostly done from New York City south.
Well, that is dependent upon again the speed of the system, whether or not it can speed up a little bit, or maybe even slow down, or appear or go slower than what the models are suggesting. But yeah, and the amount of rain also is difficult in this type of pattern. I mean, easily I think we'll see most areas will be a lock to get at least an inch, but then depending upon how much convection gets wrapped in or gets involved, you could see some spots
Especially with that,
see like
if the low is just inland of the coast, you get that good southeast inflow.
right. You can get like in some places like 3-4 inches of rain. So tropical moisture, it looks like it's going to translate into another round of wet. Wasn't it that we were complaining about how dry it
Yeah,
was?
well, that's just about done now.
I
Uh,
think that
the
is done.
the GFS, I'm looping the precip, and if you follow the max area, and this is a 2 to 4 inch zone of rain that moves over the Delmarva Peninsula and runs through eastern Pennsylvania and western New Jersey, the rain amounts actually tail off somewhat as you go to the east. So it would make sense that the heaviest rain will be north and northwest and west of the center as the low moves northward. And you see how, the heavy rain, that stripe, progresses. So that's the track of your low. That's the left side of this that moves on northward. The NAM is not really that different. The only difference I saw in the NAM today was that in terms of the heavy precip area, the NAM is actually a bit more bullish than the GFS because it has some heavy rain east of the center and has a much larger area of heavy rain west of the center over all of New Jersey, eastern and southeastern, and even into parts of south central Pennsylvania. There's a stripe of 4-inch plus rains there from northern Chesapeake Bay into south central PA and as far east as Delaware. So that would be something interesting to see. If we get a good solid a good solid inflow from the southeast here with that warm water, I mean, this is going to be really loaded with moisture. You can get some heavy rain relatively quickly. It'll probably be some pretty decent downpours that'll go on during the day Friday as this low moves north.
And there may be some more rain to deal with on Saturday and more thunderstorms. I think Sunday of the upcoming weekend will probably be the better of the 2 days. But even then, there's the possibility we may see some pop-up storm activity as well. And it looks like it's going to remain rather humid right on through the next 5, 6, 7 days. Although, Joe, I think that when we get to later next week, while it's not exactly going to dry out, I think that maybe by, well, maybe even earlier than that, maybe by Tuesday or Wednesday of next week, the dew points, which right now are up like near 70, may actually drop back a bit to the mid and even lower 60s.
That would be a gift.
Relatively speaking, I mean, if you've been dealing with 70 dew points for a number of days, and all of a sudden it drops back to 62, 63, which still by normal standards is muggy, that is a bit of relief. That's something you would hope would happen.
Right. The upper pattern, by the way, I'm just looking at the GFS, the new GFS. Once that trough in the east lifts out, and we move through next week, of course, the models have been trying to build a ridge into the east, and it does it to an extent, but once again, that northern energy, there's a deep trough that comes into the northwest that moves across southern Canada. And if it's done this now for a few runs, just as the ridge is about to pop up and build into the east, there's a shortwave that moves across southern Canada that suppresses it. So this would argue that the prolonged heat may have a tough time punching into the eastern states and may wind up being more back through the lower and middle Mississippi Valley, westward across
Right.
the southern half of the U.S. If this is correct, later next week we have a northwest flow coming out of Canada that like you said, we might still wind up being very warm, but it might be enough to take the dew points down a notch or two, which would be really
Right.
nice.
Exactly. Because right now, if you back up, Joe, to where we are on the 500, we're in no man's land right now. We're in kind
Right.
of there's no flow of any significance or whatever.
Here it is,
But
right
then
here. I have it. I've got it drawn for this evening. You're right. The ridge up and push the upper flow into northern New England. There's your system off the Carolina coast. There's your trough that's out in the northern plains. Energy coming into the northwest. And you're right. We're in this no man's land in the
right,
upper flow.
yeah, get the flow to come out of the northwest, and you're absolutely right. A northwesterly flow doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to turn cooler. It still will be rather warm, but with a northwest flow, at least we're not dealing with the uh, juicy. Can I use the term slimy? Because the way it
Yes,
feels like
you can do that.
you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
The kind of day that we had today. At least if we
You
get
want to
into a
peel it
northwest
off your
flow,
arms.
yeah, at least if we get into a northwest flow, at least that'll help to dry things out a little bit.
WPC, by the way, for rainfall has it confined to eastern North Carolina, where we've got 2 to 3 inches, and of course this is front end loaded, so this is that's reflection of this low in the east. But it now has 1.5 to 3 inch rains showing up from Delmarva northward through all of New Jersey, easternmost Pennsylvania, and into southern New England. So WPC is probably betting on a slightly more of a coastal track than what the NAM is doing and what the GFS is doing. I do want to bring up the European quickly, just to have an option here in terms of the upper air idea is the same, but I'll just bring up their particular surface map here that they have, and let's get just a close-up shot, and then we'll come back to the board, and you can take some more questions if you see any questions on there, Joe. Go ahead with them. But the European Joe actually has a track, if you want to believe it. It goes just east of southernmost Chesapeake Bay, passes east of the New Jersey coast. It has an offshore track here. It's got 1,001 low east of Atlantic City by about 50 to 60 miles. And, if you just draw the line in terms of where that low is Saturday morning, it has a slower look to it. And Sunday morning, it would take the surface low right over central or eastern Long Island. So this is something to consider if the European is correct on this idea of a bit slightly more of a coastal track, and it's going to depend on the interaction of the stream and the upper system that's in the east and that trough that's coming down in the plains. If it takes a little bit longer for it to get levered up by it, you may wind up with something a little more offshore, in which case are you going to wind up with something that does get named a tropical storm? So the European certainly has that possibility on the table here.
I suspect that the Hurricane Center is probably looking at a median or a mean between what the GFS is tracking and what the European is tracking, which would mean that, again, it would be just off the shoreline, maybe just far enough out to see for it to intensify into some kind of a system. And again, a slower movement based upon the European. So, yeah, that may take it over Long Island. We're just going to have to wait and see.
Okay, so let's get Briller Jeopardy underway. But before we do that, I just want to we'll do a little Bill Uber Jeopardy because he sent in a question for you, Mr. Rayo. Are you ready? Bill is out there counting raindrops per square foot because he's got that boilerplate over his house and mine since we're only a handful of blocks apart. How many states have glaciers?
How many states have glaciers?
Yes, how many states have living glaciers?
The only one I would think would have, and of course I've even been there and I saw them for myself, would be Alaska. Now, is it possible that that maybe he's also alluding to a place like Maine or Washington State?
Well, there are apparently 9 states that have glaciers.
Oh, get it! What 9
well,
states?
Having watched Planet Earth with Mr. David Attenborough, I could verify most of these. So the states are Washington, right. Wyoming, Yellowstone, okay, Montana, which kind of connects to Wyoming, okay, California, up in the Sierra Nevadas, I suppose, or the Cascades, Oregon, Idaho, Colorado, Nevada, and Alaska.
Well, you see, we're talking now about places with mountainous terrain, probably in excess of 5,000 to 10,000 feet, right? Those are the Cascades, for example, Washington and Oregon, and
right. Alaska has the most, and Washington has the second most.
Okay.
So these glaciers all have names. They have histories and everything else. Okay.
Yeah, have you ever seen a glacier, a calving of a glacier, Joe?
I've seen it on video. I've never personally witnessed a calving.
Now that's
I've seen childbirth, but I've never seen calving.
That's worth investing in a cruise, to an Alaskan cruise.
Oh, I'd love to see it.
As my family did like 5 years ago, we I think it was in 2015. We went to Alaska on a cruise, and they took us into a zone where there were these beautiful glaciers. And more than once, we saw a few of them just calve. And somebody said to me as we were watching, said, "Oh, it's due to global warming or whatever." But then the guide who was on board the ship said, "Well, that may well be, but you have to also understand it gets very cold around here during the winter, and come the summertime, these glaciers, some of these glaciers just calve. They've
Right.
been doing this now. They've been doing this now for God knows how many years, and they probably will continue to do so for a number of years to come. But that's quite a sight to see if you ever get a chance to get on an Alaskan
It's
cruise.
on the list.
Yes,
It's on the list.
on the bucket list.
All right. I have seen
Yeah,
Dr. Pole on National Geographic um, put after a cow gave birth. The cow's uterus kind of came
I've
out, so
seen that.
he had to push it back in. That was that.
We've seen
It's like ew, ew,
my wife and I saw that
ew.
at the Syracuse on our 30th. This is what now 6 years ago. We went to Syracuse for this New York State Fair, and they actually had a cow giving birth, and
Yeah,
it
it's
was interesting, but
yeah. No, I'm not doing that. Okay, so here we go with Briller Jeopardy. So what is the most common state bird?
the most common state bird.
Yes.
Believe it or not, I would actually say the mourning dove. Is that on the list?
Uh, no, but when I tell you the answer, you'll probably nod your head in agreement. The northern cardinal,
The northern cardinal.
because they're
Right,
everywhere, right
right.
next to the northern pope and the northern bishop.
It makes no sense though to have the Arizona Cardinals, since I don't believe they have any Cardinals in Arizona.
No, I don't think so either. At one time, and I've seen stories about this. At one time, Blockbuster Video had more than 9,000 stores worldwide. Today, there is
Just one.
one store left. Where is it?
Isn't that somewhere in Oregon, I think?
Yes, a Bend, Oregon, and
Yeah.
I think now it might be gone, but I remember hearing something about maybe that it's gone, but I'm not sure. Question
Well,
three.
oh, question three. All right.
Go ahead. No,
No, I was going to say it's already 7:30, and I know you wanted to save time for the data. So,
all right, so let's do this last one there. On Mars, sunsets are what color?
um, I know that they're blah, 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 blah. Kind of like a, a, a dusky brown or whatever because of all the dust. The dust storm.
Blue,
Excuse me?
blue,
Blue?
blue.
It's blue dust storms? All
Yes.
right. I would have thought otherwise.
Well, by the way, I just jumped on the chat board. Thanks for everybody for being here. We've got a nice crowd tonight. The usual hurricane suspects now have arrived, including Weather Enlow 78, who will now obsess from now till the end of the hurricane season about every hurricane, every tropical storm that's heading for Norfolk, Virginia.
And
Okay.
let me just say one last thing before we shut it down. Dennis Cassia asked, any chance we might actually see the comet? Joe, this comet is absolutely stunning. It's in the morning sky, rising just before sunrise. Some of you may want to try and see it if it's clear tomorrow morning. I frankly think it's going to be more cloudy than clear. But next week, the comet moves into the evening sky, and between the 14th and 19th of July, I think that'll be the time frame when it will be at its absolute best. It's a beautiful comet, bright, with a nice, gently curving tail of dust. And we hopefully will get a chance to see it next week. I don't think we'll have a chance to see it tomorrow morning because I think the weather will not cooperate. But why don't you just get up at 4:30 a.m. and step outside? You never know.
Right. By the way, Fled Weather points out that the 3 kilometer NAM with this low gets it down to a 995. I mean, if it ever gets down that deep, if that winds up getting down to a 995 low, you're going to have a tropical storm named, and
Obviously.
you're going to also probably have a fairly sized area of gales along the
Right.
coast. So that's something I think tomorrow night we'll probably be able to put our finger on. Reaver wants to know if I've ever taken a cruise, and the answer is, if you want to call it that. I took a boat. I took a what was a quote unquote ferry boat from Naples to Capri for 90 minutes, and I threw up for 90 straight minutes, which is the last time I'll ever go on any kind of long distance boat ride. So that ain't happening.
Cruises, Joe, unless you're out in a big area close to a tropical system, let's say, or a nor'easter or something like that. But most of these big cruise ships now have tremendous stabilizers, and you wouldn't even know you were on a cruise ship. So I would
Yeah.
suggest you get a chance to go on a cruise go on the Alaskan cruise because that was a really
Well,
wonderful time.
I'll have to just kind of like work my way up to that. My buddy Phil will do help me do that if we go out at Montauk and go out on a fishing trip next week. Reaver 501, please get Optimum out there soon before the storm hits. No weather in 5. Yeah, I understand. I'm Patreon members are getting a weather in 10 video every day. So their priority. So if you're on the Patreon platform, your video is going to be there, but I'm having to kind of cut back until I get the signal signal back, the internet back, because once my hotspot is done, I'm gonna have to take my equipment and go in my truck and park in some parking lot to do this and grab onto a hotspot. So if you hear a story about somebody being arrested because he's doing a live stream in the middle of a parking lot when he's not supposed to be there, then that would likely be me. Okay, so just bear that in mind. If you're late to this, you can of course watch it on the replay. Also, it's now the Joe and Joe Weather Show is available as a podcast, so you can listen to it on your phone while you're exercising, or maybe you want to listen to it in your car. We're on Google, we're on Spotify, we're on Anchor, we're on 6 different podcast platforms. And I think the one left that should be coming any day now is Apple. So we'll let you know when that happens. Okay. So everybody have a great evening. Sorry we got to cut it short, but again, just trying to save data. So we'll see you tomorrow, and at the